will be shared. The state has revised the mode in which money for higher education will be administered, with the learners from more low-income families set to be beneficiaries. And also at the front page of the People Daily, top there, shame of counties, poor spending on growth. We'll be taking a look at that report on page 4 of the paper, but we'd like to hear from you. What do you think about your county's spending on growth specifically? Do you have concerns? Have you seen development projects in your counties that you can be proud of? And okay, we have at the bottom there of the People Daily, teenager in police incident charged with robbery. So let's begin with page 6 of the paper. It is the top story on the People Daily. The government has now revised the way it funds university education, and students from low-income families are set to be the top beneficiaries. Those whose income ranges between 5,000 and 23,000 shillings will be classified under Band 2 to enjoy 90% funding, and we have those who will enjoy 95% funding under the new funding model, while those from households with an income of more than 120,000 shillings will get funding of 60%. And so we have several classifications. The middle class with income of between 70,000 and 100,000 shillings falls in Band 3 and will receive 70% funding. And then those in Band 1, who are the most vulnerable group, will get 70% in scholarship funds and 25% in loans, with the student's family only shouldering the balance of 5%. All right, so remember, this comes in the midst of concerns and complaints among students who say they have accumulated fee balances and may not be able or may have to defer their semesters in the coming semester. And so members of parliament have now come out, especially in the National Assembly Education Committee, to essentially restructure the new funding model. So the lawmakers admit that the new funding model has not been working well, essentially, with regard to the implementation of it all. And this was in a meeting yesterday with the Higher Education Principal Secretary, Beatrice Muganda. But let's bring in our panelists in studio, and we have leadership and governance expert Dr. Isaac Hassan. Good morning, and thank you so much for being with us on New Dawn today. And communications and public affairs expert Vivian Tar. Hello.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you for seeing you on this first week of June. So let's take a look at what's making headlines. And this conversation on university funding has been making headlines, and it's not just university funding. I mean, it's the entire education sector when it comes to capitation, but we'll be discussing that in a bit more detail. What do you make of this report and the fact that members of parliament have now sought to address the concerns that have previously been raised?
I guess that the interesting thing is that this new funding model for university students has been a topic of conversation that didn't just start today. There have been complaints that have been raised, even though from the government side they have tried to make it look like it's a better model and that students will get more funding. But now it's emerging that there are issues, and there's even need to relook some of these proposals that have been proposed in the education sector. So I think it's just one of those things that government needs to put more priority on, and really, especially when making decisions about social issues like healthcare and education, to really conduct extensive public participation. In this case, they should have really engaged students and known what are some of the gaps and some of the issues, and just how they could set up this fund to ensure that students are able to complete their higher education without so much stress. Yeah.
Dr. Hassan, what do you make of this conversation? I followed that meeting between the Education Committee and the Higher Education Principal Secretary, and we had the Kibra MP, Peter Orero, who called the new funding model the strangest formula he'd ever seen, saying it is more theoretical than it is practical. Do you agree?
Yeah, indeed, that is true. I totally agree with him. The biggest challenge we always face in this nation in terms of implementation of strategies or policies within ministries is the fact that we don't do the necessary due diligence before we start implementing. We use a political approach where one will want to have a situation where he being viewed as played a very great role in doing ABCD for the nation. Unfortunately, most of the things like critically issues like education requires thorough insight on before you start implementing anything. So the fact that the initial approach to the whole process was not in a way, in a manner that would have been addressed step by step, then it means that there is a big challenge. So I tend to think that whatever they are doing, even right now, requires a fallback to the extent that they need to go and study the whole model, research on it, see applicability of the model, find out the best way that remedies can be put in place in the event that some issues fails, and then implement it in phases. But the fact that we would like to do things through directives, and education is not one of the things that you can just wake up and do things through directive because of the number of stakeholders involved, then including students and universities. There must be a lot of insight that needs to be done prior to implementing such policies. Yeah. Therefore, I tend to think we need to revisit the policy rather than still trying to change the goalpost and then saying that we will also change some few things and implement it. You cannot learn through the process of complete implementation. You learn through research and through a process whereby you first have to do the necessary due diligence in order for you to approach it in a manner that is manageable.
And we'll take a look at a bit more of the education sector in our State of the Nation conversation. You take a look at the front page of the Daily Nation. At the bottom there, we have a report on varsity funding. It says state has been forced to withdraw admission letters. And of course, that's in the same meeting there. The MPs in National Assembly Education Committee have made the higher education PS, Beatrice Inyangala, commit to withdrawing admission letters of students expected to join university until the exact amount learners are supposed to pay in fees is established. And this has been one of the bones of contention. Families don't even know how much then they're supposed to pay. When you've been given percentages, 95% the government will pay, but you don't know how much then that the family is expected to pay. We'll be discussing that as well as issues of capitation. If you are affected by this new university funding model, just speak to us as well. We'll be sampling your thoughts and comments after the break. The hashtag is NewDawn at K24 TV on X. But also on the front page of the People Daily, sorry, that continues on page 7, teenager in police incident charged with robbery. And this has made headlines since that video went viral of a 19-year-old boy, a university student rather, charged with now causing grievous harm to a police officer on Sunday. And this has started an entire conversation, Vivian, on even just the relationship between citizens and police officers, the safety of police officers as well. But the bigger conversation, when you take a look at X, is many people now detailing their experiences with, you know, not just traffic police officers, just police officers who have stopped you for one reason or another. And we cannot condone assaulting of a police officer, but the conversation has begun from, should a police officer be entering your car in the first place? And, you know, is it an issue of civic education? How should it even, what do you make of this conversation?
In relation to the police officers entering your car or gaining access to your car, I think they've changed the law now. I think previously there was no law allowing them to, but, you know, just because the officer is in uniform and is in a place of authority and, you know, you'd feel intimidated, you know, probably people would allow it. But I think they've changed the law now, and I think they are now allowed. But just on the conversation of citizens and police, I think there's a lot of mistrust between citizens and police. And also, remember, we're coming from just a place where police are used often to brutalize, you know, citizens. And there are many times we see images of Especially the one that comes to mind is the incident in Kisumu during Mandamano time, when police really went out of their way, got people out of their houses and beat them up, like, you know, thoroughly. And it was a bad case of police brutality. But of course, this does not in any way make it right for, you know, a citizen or a civilian to assault a police officer. I think there needs to be a lot more, maybe, collaboration between citizens and police. And of course, civic education would play a part on what is the role of, you know, of police in keeping the peace and in just getting things going in terms of security within communities and the whole society. But then police also need to step up their efforts in how they interact and engage with citizens, and so that citizens can better understand how they can live and work in harmony, so that we have less incidences. Because I'm sure this is not the first incident of, you know, a police officer being assaulted and being caught on video. As much as, yes, we should reprimand and not condone such things, but then the police also have to play their part in making sure they deliver, you know, to the citizens as required. You know, don't solicit bribes, don't do things that are not expected, or that do not bring respect to your uniform, to the crown that you wear. So there need to be actions from both ends, from the National Police Service, but also just, you know, from the citizens, and maybe through their leaders, church leaders, community leaders, and also elected leaders, in just sensitizing people on the role of police, what they do, how people can work together better, because they are there to serve us. They're there to serve us.
Hassan, what do you make of this? And, you know, when you take a look at the charges that the boys are facing, it is, you know, causing grievous harm to a police officer, but it's also facing charges of violence with robbery, resisting arrest, causing obstruction in traffic. And the charge of violence with robbery actually carries a death sentence upon conviction. But what has this entire scenario said to you?
I think one important thing that we need to understand is that law enforcement officers play a very crucial role in protecting Kenyans from all the things that would have been, in essence, caused restless life for you. If you go to countries where there are issues regarding insecurity, you will not have a sleep. And therefore, we need to have modalities in which law enforcement agencies are protected themselves. Go and try to do something which this young man has done in these Western countries, which are, you know, talking about democracy, which are talking about police tortures and all other things. You'll be killed. You will not even be even hurt, and they are all armed. I don't understand what modalities our Kenyan government are using, or national police services are using, in failing to arm their officers who are on the ground, because criminals are always there. The unfortunate part is that Kenyans are not understanding the role of police. It's like an enemy versus you know, two enemies who are trying to compete. But another point that I wanted to bring out is that I think the respect and culture that Kenyans used to have for uniformed officers has been lost through the uniform officers. What do I mean? You remember when in 90s, 80s, up to until 2000 and 2010, if you are a civil servant or a government official, police officer will not come to your house and arrest you. Once there is a case against you, the permanent secretary is informed, the immediate supervisor is informed, and you are told to come and report to specific places for purposes of interrogation or for purposes of answering a case that has been put in place. But when we see EACC officers on camera chasing police officers on the streets, arresting them, sometimes even you remember this lady who was a police officer who was falling inside a ditch while she was being chased by EACC officers. That is unethical in terms of professionalism as well as in terms of addressing issues of policy. The moment the community sees or the public sees that police officers can be harassed like that by their own police colleagues, police officers' colleagues, then they also develop that notion that what is wrong with me attacking a police officer if he misbehaves. We are not saying police officers do not misbehave, but that is not the way to approach it.
Right.
Because the moment we lose the grip of or the disconnect between the public and the police law enforcement officers, then just to know that even if something is happening next to you, a police officer will not going to respond. And the first thing you want someone to do is when an incident is occurring to you, you want a police officer to respond.
I think you bring in an important
that
issue of trust and the rapport between police officers and civilians, because when you take a look at the social media comments, many are asking, how do I even know this is a police officer asking to get into my car? You know, should there be, we need civic education on how the communication should be done. Should they identify themselves, tell you why you've been arrested before they get into your car? And I believe many of these altercations come up as because of a lack of communication or understanding between the two parties. I believe it's a conversation that needs a bit more follow-up in terms of civic education. But I want to take a look at page 10 of the paper.
Actually, before we move on, just still on the police issue, recently there have been several incidents of police assault. I think there was even a police officer who died. It's an ongoing case, the one of DJ John Falme.
Right.
So I think there just needs to be greater conversation or information about the role of the police in the community and how the public can plug in. But the aspect of respect definitely comes in. It doesn't matter whether the police officer was on the wrong. Assaulting a police officer is not something that should be condoned.
Absolutely.
But that said, still, torture and brutality, even of a suspect or someone who's been arrested, is also not acceptable. When someone is arrested, let the due process of law be followed, and they still have rights. They still have rights, even if they are an accused person. They still have legitimate rights as per the Kenyan Constitution, and they still deserve to be, treated properly, regardless of what their crime or accusation may be.
All right.
No, I think just one thing on that point. I think the issue of police torture, of course, it is condoned and it's not something that will be accepted. But in regards to this case, I don't think if there is any police torture which is involved. Reason being, the fact that lawyers will always want to protect their client, and that's their business, does not necessarily mean that this young man has been tortured. We didn't see any physical torture when he has been brought to court. So I tend to think, let's not fix two things together, that we protect one side a criminal, and on the other side we condemn the police officers. I gave an example of where if you try to do that in UK or US, you will die before even you come to court, because that is completely unacceptable. And something that is not acceptable, once we try to entertain that, then all our children will going to do that. What will happen then? There will be disconnect between law enforcement officers and the public at large.
All right. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this conversation as well. The hashtag is New Dawn. What do you make of this report? What are your thoughts on how to boost the rapport between police, law enforcement officers and civilians? Let's wind up with the People Daily on page 10 of the paper. That's the daily cartoon, my favorite part of the People Daily, really. And if we can put that up, it's the 2023 succession crown is huge and glowing. And on one end, we have Wanjiku. I don't know if you can see Wanjiku in that picture. We'll have it up for you in just a moment. Poor Wanjiku. And on the back of Wanjiku is a Mount Kenya politician, very well fed Mount Kenya politician, who tells Wanjiku, be strong, there is hope. But the eyes are well trained on that 2023 succession crown. On one end, we have development with nothing to show for it, and the 2027 polls. I always say a picture speaks 1,000 words. Vivian, what does this picture say to you?
The Mount Kenya politician, who I think we all can guess who it is, clearly seems to have their eye on the crown, on the prize, without really paying much attention to you know, to Wanjiko or the common Mwananchi, which I think is the true case for most politicians in this country. But just that said, I know there's been some friction of some kind within the ruling party, especially in relation to, you know, Mount Kenya. We've had different comments from different leaders within the ruling party, both from the Rift Valley and also from Mount Kenya, you know, just showing that there's misalignment somehow or the other. But I think the thing I would tell the Deputy President, of course I'm not his advisor, but if I was to tell him, there's this book, 48 Laws of Power, and I think one of the laws, I think it's law 26 or 27, one of them, something like that, that talks about dealing with your opponents. I think if he's keen on propelling himself from being just a Mount Kenya politician or a regional kingpin into real national politics where he has support and control from various parts of Kenya, then he really needs to deal decisively with the people who are not for him. Not to mean that, you know, in a violent sort of way, but then there needs to be, his presence needs to be felt. Yeah,
this is a democracy, and people can have dissenting voices and make their voices heard.
Yes, of course. I mean, it's acceptable, because that's how democracy works. You don't all sing the same tune. Right. But the thing is, the issue here is people are angling for power to maintain it, to cement it, and also to propel themselves for the next, you know, level. And the interesting thing we also see from this cartoon is there seems to be this notion that 2027 is out of bounds and we are only looking at 2032, right, which I think is a misconception, because Kenyans are still expected to go to the ballot either way, right, in 2027 and make our voices heard. So I think also people in the ruling party should move away from this notion of, you know, 2027 is a given. Everything will align and things will work like this, because not necessarily. We've seen what's happened in South Africa, you know, the current elections. So things are not always as they seem. You know, you might have all your ducks in a row and think that, you know, come 2027, we're not even discussing 2027 because we know this is how things are going to be. It's a given,
it's a democracy,
but not
so
necessarily.
Kenyans get to choose.
Yes.
Hassan, your interpretation of this picture?
Yeah, I think a lot has been said by my colleague, as you hear. It's all about the mountain. And of course, nobody cares about Wanjiku. And if you don't care about Wanjiku, you don't actually care about development, you don't care about 2027, you want an office, you want to occupy an office. That's the theory of all the politicians they have used. Unfortunately, our deputy president, I don't intend to advise him on his own things because he has his own advisors. But I think he didn't learn from the current president when he was a deputy. A lot needs to be done. You need to lie low. You need to put your things in order for you to see the lights ahead at the end of the tunnel. The fact that you are deputy, you have all the opportunity to serve these people using the president so that the country sees you as a productive leader, a person who is able to pick the mantle and serve this nation as a president. But it looks like soon we will going to have regional presidents, because if our deputy president has put all his concentration on the mountain, then I think him being the person we elected for the national role, then looks like it is a bit not in order for him as a politician, and probably he's losing the grip.
That doesn't say charity begins at home. So before you become a national leader, you must be accepted and keep your regional politics at home in check.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Being a deputy president did not just come on a silver platter. He has already done that and earned that. So is it that you go back to where you have already, the one which has already propelled you to become a deputy president? But again, why are we talking about succession for 2032 for the mountain? Who said that in this country it's only the people in the mountain or the people in the rift who will lead this country as president? No, we will also want to become president in 2032. So I don't understand why our focus in terms of discussing who will become the president in this nation just revolves around the mountain or the rift. I think there are a lot of other Kenyans who have the capability to serve this nation in the capacity as a president, and I don't think if this discussion is actually placed well. You could still politic in terms of looking at whether you want to have the succession formula work for you. But the bottom line is that it is not time for us to talk about 2032. Number two, as she mentioned,
we must take a break.
2027 is another battleground for all Kenyans. Who said that the current president will still be the president? Are we trying to say that, of course, when someone comes in at once, then the second term is obvious? So if Kenyans believe that, then we give the 10-term period for every president. Once you come in, you finish your 10 term without even going into a lot of expenditure and putting exchequer's money on unnecessary expenditures.
We'd like to hear from you as well on what your thoughts are on this conversation. Should we be discussing 2032 politics? And what about 2027? What do you make of that conversation? Or the rhetoric, rather, that it is, you know, a clean win for the ruling government in 2027. Let's take a break, but when we come back, we'll take a look at the state of the nation. We'll be focusing on the health sector as patients continue to suffer amid drug and vaccine shortages in hospital, as well as the ongoing public participation process on the Finance Bill 2024. That and much more coming up. Do stay with us.
Joe Jefferson, a boy from the ordinary world, Earth, has been summoned to Muddle Earth, a medieval fantasy world. Full of monsters, mayhem, and he must fight evil on behalf of the wizard Randolph. Muddle Earth, only on K24 TV. Agriculture is the engine of economic growth in Kenya. It is the largest contributor to Kenya's GDP. Farming, if well practiced, is a profitable venture. Kilimo na Biashara is a show that seeks to help